What follows is from Matthew 26:30 through 27 and 66. When they had sung the hymn after the meal, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee."
Peter said to him, "Even if all fall away because of you, I will never fall away."
Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times.
Peter said to him, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And so said all the disciples.
Then Jesus went with them to the place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and he began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "So you could not stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, he went away for the 2nd time and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Now the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. Look, my betrayer is at hand."
While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man, arrest him." At once he came up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and he kissed him.
Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you are here to do." Then they came and they laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. Suddenly one of those with Jesus put his hand on his sword and drew it and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will die by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and that he at once would send more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say it must happen in this way?" At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a rebel? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." Then the disciples deserted him and fled.
Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus so that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last, 2 came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." The high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God."
Jesus said to him, "You have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven.
Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?" Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A female servant came to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before all of them, saying, "I do not know what you are talking about." When he went out to the porch, another servant saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus the Nazarene." Again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you are also one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man." At that moment, the rooster crowed.
Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. When the morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor.
When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. He said, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they said, "What is that to us? See to it yourself." Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money." After conferring together, they used them to buy the potter's field as a place to bury foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one on whom a price had been set, on whom some of the people of Israel had set a price, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?"
Jesus said, "You say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge. So the governor was greatly amazed.
Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd, anyone whom they wanted. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governors again said to the crowds to ask for Barabbas, and said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But the crowd shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be upon us." So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him.
As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon. They compelled this man to carry the cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which it means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his clothes among themselves by casting lots. Then they sat down there and kept watch over him. Over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews."
Then 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from that cross." In the same way, the chief priests, also along with the scribes and the elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants to, for he said, 'I am God's son.'" The rebels who were crucified with him also taunted him in the same way.
From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "This man is calling for Elijah." At once, one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come to save him." Then Jesus cried again in a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, "Truly, this man was God's son." Many women were also there, looking on from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons Zebedee.
When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was himself a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. He then rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb.
The next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that impostor said that while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' Therefore, command the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may go and steal him away and tell the people that he is raised from the dead. And the last deception would be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go, make it as secure as you can." So they went with the guard and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone.
This is an ugly text. It's an ugly story for a lot of reasons. It's hideous for the way we see the joyous shouts of Palm Sunday, of that triumphant entry, turn into desertion, to betrayal, to a complete abdication of responsibility as Pilate and the others try to wash their hands. It's ugly just to read this story. It's ugly for the way that it has been passed down to us, the way that the conflict in religious communities has been used and told in this story to fuel generations of anti-Semitism. It's ugly for the way that it gets misused by so many Christians as a lifting up of violence and vindication. This story's ugly for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons I find it ugly is Judas. Judas always seems to be portrayed as the bad guy. Everybody knows that Judas is the one who betrays Jesus. He's the most famous traitor, perhaps, in history. Perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of jealousy, or perhaps because he needed the money. For one reason or another, Judas betrays the man he has followed, a man he has loved and broken bread with. Judas betrays Jesus, and everybody knows that. That's what everybody remembers. But it's really easy to forget. I myself often forget that Judas turned back. Judas, shocked at what his compromise has led to, disgusted by the violence that has stemmed from his decision to turn informant, tries to undo what he has done. But the authorities, those with the power to make a change, perhaps shocked themselves by the evil they are participating in, won't take the money back. They won't take the money back. Pilate will not step in. The soldiers will not abandon their post. Nobody is willing to break rank. Pilate has washed his hands. The religious leaders have washed their hands. It is only Judas, one who loved Jesus, who is left with a feeling of guilt, a guilt so strong that it eventually destroys him. I have to wonder what might have happened if Judas had only held on a little longer. If only there had been one of those disciples who, when they fled from Jesus' side, had run to Judas to tell him that even though he hates the thing he did, even though he feels like he will never be able to be unburdened by it, it's not true, that there's still hope. If someone would walk with him for just 3 days, how different Judas's story might have been. He's an easy villain. It's easy to label him a traitor. It's easy to look at Judas as the guilty one when everyone else has washed their hands. To place the shame on him, it's easier to do that than it is to admit that the whole system, all of it, is guilty. It's easier to point at Judas than it is to look inside ourselves and see that we all make compromises every day, that not one of us is incapable of betrayal, disappointment, despair. Like Judas, we all need someone to walk with us just a little while longer sometimes, to remind us that in every moment we are still capable of turning towards love, of turning back towards connection, or of turning towards greed, toward hatred, towards betrayal, for the same violence that got us here. Seeking their own righteousness, denying their own implication in the senseless violence, they all turn away from Judas. The violence they've done, the violence Judas, albeit somewhat unwittingly, enabled, all comes back to them. It comes back to Judas. The seeds of violence always bear bitter fruit. Violence against the earth, Violence against its people always bears fruit. We've seen this fruit in countless places, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Ukraine and Palestine, in our own country, within our own borders, with the violence committed against Native people, Black people in this country. We see its fruit in our obsession with guns and violence in this country. Even as they kill tens of thousands of people every year, still, we will not turn our backs on them. Still, we insist on sowing seeds of violence, handing over more and more of our silver, and then watching, unable to comprehend the violence we've unleashed, while the pilots, the religious leaders, the political leaders stand aside, washing their hands. Palm Sunday reminds us that in each of us is the capacity to turn towards love, towards life, towards hope for all things made new, for all connections rebuilt, and the capacity to turn away. It reminds us that none of us exist in isolation, that we're part of communities and systems that are complex beyond what we can comprehend, and that even when the world seems to close in around us, even when that system feels so big that our small turning can't actually mean anything, that it can. Somehow there is more there. More life, more capacity for justice and kindness and joy, more transformation, more peace, always more than we could ever imagine. Our grief during Holy Week, as we relive this powerful story, if it is to mean anything at all, it has to be grief for all of it. It must be weeping for Jesus, an innocent man unjustly condemned. It must be weeping for Judas, an imperfect man unjustly condemned and abandoned by his friends. And it must be hope that Judas needed badly, hope that Jesus offers even in his death, as even on the cross, he refuses to accept violence as the way forward. I wish that Judas could have made it through Holy Week. I wish that Judas could have had some of that hope. I wish he had known what was on the horizon, and if one person had reached out to him, he might have known. I wish someone could have walked with him just for 3 days, just to comfort him and let him know that even now, even as he hates this thing he has done, his hope was not lost. I pray that we are all finding that hope here. I pray that Westminster can be a place where people find that hope, because I believe that is the work Christian communities are called to. And so may we walk into this Holy Week with love. We walk through Holy Week knowing that we go to grief, but knowing that we go beyond, walking with love and compassion for all those who are suffering, and even for the ones who knowingly or unknowingly continue to inflict suffering, for it always comes back upon them. May the love that we find in Christ, the love that lives in us, settle for nothing short. For the total rejection of violence in all its pernicious forms, for the total healing and peace of the earth, in this week, in this season, and in every season. Amen.